Hello, everyone. Hello. Well, this will be quite the interactive session, ideally. I mean, it depends on you. I'm definitely going to ask you a bunch of questions. So if you want to move closer, you're welcome to. But otherwise, I also welcome you to scream down loudly from wherever you're sitting. It's a long slot, and I will definitely not spend all of that talking. In fact, I think what's interesting about DeSci and generally about doing things in a more decentralized way is that ideally you collaborate much more. So I won't be talking at you for very much. And generally, in these things, the algorithm, or like, I guess the mechanism really to some extent is if you want me to stop talking, you can just start talking. So it's going to be very, very collaborative and interactive. And I really mean it. So whenever you have a question, when something's not clear, just shout it out. Let's have a discussion. It's early days in DeSci, and you're all here for a reason. Probably most of you could be on stage. So let's make this collaborative. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today, sorry, I should say I'm Allison. I'm the CEO of Foresight Institute, a nonprofit that was founded 30 plus years ago, almost 38 at this point, by Eric Drexler on the books Engines of Creation, which was a long-term promise of molecular nanotechnology, like atomically precise manufacturing. What would it mean if we could actually build things with atomic precision? And it also had a bunch of other technology interests. I came to the organization 10 years ago. And so since then, we've really kind of like taken on many of these tracks that were previously, I guess, like more like researchy. And you've seen like many of them already spin out into really like their own research fields. But in a nutshell, what we focus on is molecular machines, which is this idea of molecular manufacturing. What would it mean if you could really manufacture with increasing precision, neurotechnology, and here the goal is really brain-computer interfaces, and like ideally at the end of the day, whole brain emulations. What would it look like if we can actually do that? Longevity biotech, which I think is now really just like since a few years at least has become a little bit more of a no-brainer. And so basically the idea that, what could it mean if we hit escape velocity in longevity? How can we get there fast? I know that John already spoke about the intersection between space and longevity. Actually, space pretty important. So here we focus more on the near-term stuff like asteroid mining, but then also a few of the more further out things that aren't really being taken into account very much. Like one of our fellows is working on like how to mine a black hole, and so it gets a little bit more further out there. But the intelligent cooperation one is the one I think that is most familiar to you guys. That is basically our phrasing for saying what would it look like to in a decentralized way collaborate intelligently with other humans and ultimately other intelligences. And I'll get there in a second. But what does it mean that we support these areas? Well, we have a bunch of different ways in which we do that. So we do research ourselves, but really what we do is we host seminars in all of these areas. So if you're interested, once a month we have a keynote seminar. This is always a small group of people working in this area and working in the space. We invite them, like it's about 200 people in a Google group, and they can like do like a gradual of like review of like what's happening currently in that space. And we then publish that as YouTube video, if it's on the record. Those are like, I guess you can call them classes, really. And so if you work in any of these areas and want to join them from the inside, there's an application form. Welcome you to do so. They're good fun. We also do workshops in these areas. So in all of these, we have a workshop going on once a year. We give out prizes and fellowships. We've given the Feynman Prize now since 1993. And we have fellowships as well. We just closed the one for this year, but the one for next year is open. And so if like you're interested in being like, I guess having a few more senior folks in your area or like investors, philanthropists and so forth, mentor you in your endeavors, then I welcome you to check that out. But like, that's just to kind of tell you, but like, what does it mean that we support these ecosystems? In a nutshell, like we support these like very early stage technologies that are still a bit too out there or too ambitious for legacy funders to support. And we try to like kindle an ecosystem where there really isn't one yet. And that's done through these seminars, prizes, fellowships, and so forth. And so why am I telling you all of this if we're talking about DeSci here? Because we came kind of from the DeSci space as a more normal traditional science organization. And so our main project here is tech trees. And so me running these programs, I often get the question of like, well, I'm an investor. I would love to invest in like rejuvenation companies. What should I invest in? or like I'm, like I just finished grad school. I don't really know where I want to go and what I should do with the rest of my career. And honestly, I'm really not. I really shouldn't be the person giving any advice on this. And so after a while, we thought, okay, what if we build these technology trees? And so what would it mean if instead of like having to individually guide people into different domains, we can actually map out what it means for a space to exist. And so, for example, for neurotechnology, what would it mean to go from here to actually brain-computer interfaces? And along the path, what are the different technological milestones that we have to hit? But also crucially, who are the main actors already on there? So let's say you want to work in a lab, and you want to work in a specific piece on brain-computer interfaces. You know exactly which labs are out there, what work they're doing, and you can kind of like self-select a little bit faster into areas that are perhaps undervalued. Also for investors, it's interesting because you see like the space, the main actors in the space, and how to best plug in. And so we set out to do that last year. And so that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about. And that's where I really want your guys' input. So we have this team of like our pioneer team. So for molecular machines, we have one postdoctoral fellow at the Northwestern University from Marina. She's at Max Planck. Ying-Tong Lei, she's at the Electric Coring Company from space. He's at the European Space Agency. And then we have Foresight's research director, and they went out and did like a scaffold of like, how does that field look like? Who's working on what? Where are currently undervalued areas? And so maybe I would love to have a hand up. So we have the areas longevity biotech, intelligent cooperation space, molecular machines, and neurotech. So maybe we go like one by one. Is anyone here working in longevity biotech? Hands up. Okay, I see one hand over there. Okay. Huh? Yeah, that works. That's working. You're doing your job. You're pushing the field forward. Cool. So maybe we just dive into that tree. First, I think the other ones are still a little bit like even more esoteric. So in a nutshell, basically, they're already on the website. They're still under development. We started them this year, but we built the software in-house because there isn't really one if you want to outsource it eventually. But you can kind of see like the gist of this. So at the end of the thing, you have different goals that we may want. And we call longevity biotech like in a pretty, I guess, more of a out there ambitious term of like it includes body replacement, body enhancement. So it's more like a transhumanist vision of longevity. But then also more mainstream areas like, really just reducing rate of damage accumulation, increasing rate of body repair, and so forth. And so in each of these areas, we basically try to see, what are the main kind of like components that we need to solve along the way, and who is working on which parts of this. And so if you click or like zoom in on any of these nodes, they all stand in relation to each other, but what you see is kind of like roughly what is this concept about. You see like a little pop-up that tells you what this is, why it's important, and then you get like labs working on this, companies, and if you click on them, you get directly to the website. So if you're interested in working at these companies or labs, you have like a bit of an easier digestible shortcut to them than just literally like reading a bunch of reports. And so one other thing that we really want is challenges in a field. So what we did basically by coming up with them, because on the one hand, it's nice to know who's already doing what, but on the other hand, it would also be really good to know what do these people actually, what's holding them back, right? Why are they not progressing faster? And so the second question that we ask people, apart from like, who are the actors in your particular space, is like, what's an undervalued challenge that you really wish you could solve if only you had the time and resources? And frankly, you come up with a bunch of different challenges there. People really have like a long laundry list. So for those of you who are working on longevity biotech, which is one person, I'm putting you on the spot now. What are you working on in longevity biotech in particular? Okay, cool. So what is one thing where you're just like, if only I could wave a magic wand or had a postdoc working on this or whatnot, what would you love to see solved? What would like bring your field further along much faster? Well, I have 40 minutes for the slot, so if you want to monopolize it, go for it.
No, the question is not if I have limited time of research, not the limit. No, I want to.
You have a genie.
Okay, so well, I think key problem of longevity field is the lack of paradigm, because we all age, but nobody understands what for. That's we are working on. So there are many observations that you see in your slides, but what of these are primary, what are secondary is a question.
Yeah.
So like you have a flattened tire, you see a flattened tire, do we need to pump it, or we need to look for a notch or a nail in the... So these questions are still not answered in longevity research, and I think that's the key issue.
Yeah, well, you're asking the meta question here. Like,
yes.
How do all of these individual bits relate to each other, and what do you do about them? Like, do you
if you want to
like repair, do you replace,
if you want to me to share an experiment that I will never do because I don't have time and money. So there are, there are the snake mole rats.
Yes.
But there are also furry mole rats. That furry mole rats, they also have eusocial structure. They have queens and workers. And it's easy to transit from the worker to a queen. And the queen is long-lived and the worker is short-lived. So it should be a very simple hormonal regulation that should make an animal long-lived. And I if I would be infinite life, infinite money, I would study that probably.
Okay,
because
great.
It's fun.
So look, this is really concrete. You're even giving us like experiments here that we could do. So this is exactly the question that we ask people in the field of just like, if you had this one thing, like, what do you think there isn't like, enough resources to spend on? And then what we do is first we go out and put bounties on it. So we had like a bunch of Gitcoin bounties on individual things. Here you see a few on dietary control, autophagy, advanced glycation end products, and people basically produce like quick one-pagers or something of like, this is what I would do. And then they get $500 for that. I guess it was an ETH, so I don't know what that is right now. And it used to be 500 USD at the time. But, in a nutshell, we're really trying to like already get into the point of like problem solving and like outsourcing and decentralizing this kind of whole process of like, how do you make progress on a field? And the idea is that over time, well, I'll get to that in a second, but I'll show you what we want to do. Obviously, it shouldn't stay with the bounty. What you can do is, you can have IP NFTs. Later on, you can actually have like entire funds, like Syndicate DAO sitting on a node and like funding bits. But I'll get to that in a second. Let's like maybe figure out another one. Is anyone here working in space? Okay, Jordan's out there socializing. Too bad, Jordan. I can't. Okay, he's here. Jordan, you're working in space. So great that you're here. I'll put you on the spot right away. So I know. Aren't you glad you could just came in here? So this is like roughly like Romain kind of like clustered the space of like the space of space technologies, and had like, a few like individual bits of like, what does it actually look like to make progress in space? So we have everything here from like, from power to propulsion and space. Like, I mean, the interesting thing about these sectors is like, they're really, each field requires a very different crystallization, but we have the remitigation, in situ resource utilization, and so forth. And so, Jordan, what part in space are you working on? For those of you that don't remember from last one.
Longevity.
Space longevity, great. Yeah, the intersection. Wonderful. If there was one challenge that you really, really, really want to see solved, let's think more with the space head on. What would that be?
Inflammation in space.
Inflammation in space. So see, we actually need to create a new node here for actually the space longevity overlap. And so I should also say, I didn't say that at the beginning, one really big draw for us of creating these tech trees is that over time, different researchers in one field can see how their fields overlap with other fields as well. And so over time, you get this interdisciplinarity really well, I think, together, and people can just like place themselves in relation to other people too. Okay, maybe let's do one where more people here in the space are working on. Thank you, Jordan. We definitely need to get a longevity node on the space tree. So this one here is on basically decentralized computing. And so we have everything from decentralized data governance to decentralized consensus system, private computation, private artificial intelligence, private decentralized computation, and long-term AI problems. Is there anyone here that, where you think that you're working on the space of decentralized computing? Decentralized computing. What would be the number one thing that, first of all, what field, like particularly where are you working on, what subfield there, and like what would you like to solve if only you could?
We go and give Web3 properties to databases. So making it so that you can have a Web3 secure lineage. So data hasn't been tampered with. We know how it's been accessed. And then making it available for things like confidential computing.
Wonderful. Confidential computing. Here we are. Well, we have private and private decentralized computing. And so I think that there's like a lot of things really that, relay at that intersection. What would you like to solve if you could wave a magic wand?
I had a few interesting conversations today with people that were saying that, even if you have confidential computing to go and be able to analyze a data set, that people could actually extract data from the results and recreate parts of the data set. So I wish there was one magical blended confidential computing algorithm that would be ensured to not exfiltrate data, but just make things work as expected.
It's centralized computing. Great. Well, actually, I think with federated learning, it could potentially
It's close.
It could work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So, again, as an example, we would have that challenge and we'd put it on the map, right? And so the idea here really is that we're adding a bunch of actors that are working on individual fields. We're adding a bunch of challenges and then put bounties on them to solve them. So that's the current state of these trees. I'll welcome you to check them out. They're all online here. If you're more into neurotech, go for it. This one is getting into crazy realms of like really long-term molecular manufacturing. So like, I think for everyone, whoever is working on something, there's really something there. I just talked with someone yesterday who saw me present on this at ETH Amsterdam. And based on that, she started a whole molecular, a design tool framework for molecular machines and is now using that to make more long-term progress. So I think that like the main goal here really is like to more quickly get people into where they should be within the technology sector. Okay, cool. So that's like where these trees are now. I already told you that on the long run, we really want to put more bounties and like put more money on actually individual problems by like interviewing more domain experts. But then if we think really long term, or like let's think medium term, ideally what you want is also prediction markets on that, or something like impact certificates. So you can actually track which of the different things that you fund make the most progress. And we have like one work stream working on this too. But like if we go like really out there all the way, what could these tech trees look like? What we could do with them on the long term? Well, glad you asked. So there's one, let's start with the medium term one. So Balaji, Trent McConney from Ocean, and Evan from Protocol Labs, and a few others, and I have we collaborated on a hackathon earlier last year to make a better tool for in a decentralized way, actually like crowdsourcing and crowdfunding these tech trees. And so we had like a hackathon for about like, I don't know, I think it was 3 months or so, with the top prize. And that's because we all came to this idea of tech trees from a different way. We just wanted to map our spaces and help people get in. Balaji, like a little later, published this post, like it was a tweet at the time, of a tech tree that looks a bit different. So this one is a tech tree where you don't map out like an area, for example, brain-computer interfaces, but here an individual investor has a tech tree, and they are basically like have this kind of like hypothesis and like, this thesis statement, and then they slot different technology stacks that they find along their way and add them into their own tech tree map. And then, you can imagine different people coming in and mix and matching, like, if I'm in another angel, I'll see Balaji's tree, I like maybe grab a part that I find great and like leave another one out that I don't agree with. And over time, you have this kind of composability of what individual angels are working on. And so you could already see, okay, like there's a bunch of people over here clustered in this particular longevity side. I'm going to go over here. And so that was another really, I think, neat way in which these tech trees can be used. And then the very far out one is from Trent McConney. I really, really welcome you to check out the post that he wrote. It's called Starships and Tokens. And he takes this whole thing up a notch. So now imagine you just saw me presenting on individual tech trees for an area like molecular machines, brain-computer interfaces. So Trent basically slots them all together. So here you have clean drinking water and reduce poverty. Like, what would it mean to solve that part? Great. Here you then have like, kind of like safe AI that actually helps humans. You have like, okay, AI takes all the jobs, and then, what do we do about this? So that's like one frontier. And so that's the intelligent cooperation part that I showed you also in ours. Then here you have the brain-computer interface part that I showed you in our in our tech tree. And so he is also thinking about, okay, how could the brain-computer interface part work? Here he has the space tech tree, like definitely important if you want to reshape the cosmos. And so that's like another kind of individual tree that we're building. And then up there you have the share computer one, which is more like the intelligent cooperation tree that we're building. And so he basically came from it from the other direction and already slotted all of these pieces together and had this ultimate tech tree of what it would look like to kind of build on individual areas and like actually reshape the cosmos in the long run. And I know that sounds like a lot, but now just imagine really if we had individual challenges like on these nodes roughly, and people could, you know, like, I mean, for him, he basically just said it should be QR codes and people can like basically just donate to them. But you could also imagine, you know, like them being IP NFTs. So everyone who like funds a specific node, on the other hand, you can get project proposals for solving it. And then everyone who funded a node gets a fraction IP NFTs for like having contributed to it. And so over time, you can really track research. And now one step further, what would it mean if people could not only propose with research proposals, but could actually pitch early stage companies? So for example, I create a syndicate DAO that really only focuses on this one part of like Dropbox your brain. I say basically, I want to only fund companies that Dropbox your brain. I create a syndicate DAO, slot my money in there, have it shown on the tech tree. And on the other hand, founders can propose with their companies. Then there's a kind of like review mechanism that could either be done through like a multi-sig, what have you, or like a more elaborate process. And then eventually you can fund a few projects, and then you can track with the prediction market really like along the entire area how fast you're making progress toward the long-term goal of exploring the cosmos. And the cool thing is, you know, like you really pick up steam if you like know who's working on what, and roughly where you want to go. I think you can really coordinate people to do outrageous things, because no individual would right now be like, okay, I'm going to fund everything that's over here because I know everyone else has got this covered. But if you could make that a little bit more transparent, that different people take on different chunks, you could actually go quite fast. So it's like it's a little bit more a collaborative approach to like long-term civilization scale progress in a decentralized way, I think, you know, crucially. Okay, so that's one. Are there any questions, tech tree specific questions? Okay, we have a few. Yes.
Thanks, I can hit it right back. I was wondering if you, so I guess best way to phrase this question is, do you think the bounties provide an adequate incentive for scientists to pursue them? Because just coming from the science field, a lot of scientists pursue their passion. So even if it isn't in line with the tree, you know, it might be out here, but they're like, this is something that I really want to solve for personal reasons. Do you think that there's a way to align those incentives? Or do you think the bounty suffices that?
Yeah, I don't think bounties do really very much. Just we're pretty funding constraints. So like the best way we could do is like, okay, at least like send us a one page of how could you do this? And so, you know, ideally, I mean, it's great if people are already self-motivated, in which case, you know, like if they're working on something that actually has like an impact for like long-term technological progress, all we would need to do is just slot them, like basically map them. You know, we could just list their work and other people can then fund them. Like, you know, currently we're only listing labs and companies, but you can also list independent researchers eventually. And like, for example, if they have a funding request, and you know their individual pet project happens to be at a crucial node for long-term progress, if you list them on a tech tree, other folks can like have that visibility and just be like, oh, I didn't know that someone's actually like already got that. Okay, fine. Maybe I'll up the funding. And so I definitely think that if people are self-motivated, even the better. We definitely don't want to discourage that. But some people may not be, or some people may also just not know really like what to focus on. Any other questions, comments? Red teaming, criticism.
Yeah. Have you thought about linking your like sort of high level tech trees with more of the details for the specific studies? I was chatting with about Singularity.ai, and Natasha gave an interesting chat later where they were trying to go and break down within a paper what are the concepts, you know, almost as metadata for the paper that could maybe, you know, bubble up through your high level graph.
Oh God, yeah. Natasha, actually, we had this workshop, crypto security and AI workshop recently, and Natasha came up, I think, with that project at that workshop. That was a few weeks ago, and that was because, I mean, we had a short tech tree run there as well, but we also had Martin here from Discourse Graphs, who maybe a few of you know. Anyway, there's a bunch of like interesting mapping tools out there right now, and obviously, ideally, you want to link out to as much as you possibly could. And her project is definitely one that we're hoping to interoperate with eventually, if we get there. So I think it's a good time, like more and more people are currently building these tools. And I think they ultimately, the more composable and interoperable they are, the better. Yes, absolutely. I think it's a great idea.
And then just one quick follow up to that. Is the data set that you collected, do you make it open? Like
that is a great question. So currently the way that, currently if you click on a tree, you see it as viewer mode. But what we're doing at the end of this year is, hopefully, if we're on track, to outsource it so that you're in edit mode. And so different people can leave their comments. So basically, whenever you click on any individual node here, right, you see a little beacon, a little pop-up come up here. And so this pop-up then looks different. It looks like a comment box. And you can basically just like edit a node and then hit submit. And then people on the back end see that. And so basically, I think here you still have to go and actually save it and send it. But like ideally, not ideally, but like we're actively working on like actually being able to submit this. And so once you've done that, then in the back end, folks can review the node and can, if they like the change, can just can immediately accept that. And so we're trying to basically get from where we are right now into a more decentralized structure. At the same time, I'm working with Trent from Ocean and with a few others on like actually creating a decentralized data storage that sits on the back end. And so that's kind of happening in parallel. We're building out the front end still in this format, and then eventually, hopefully, we can snap them together. And so this can live on a decentralized infrastructure for crowdsourcing as well.
I'm going to follow up with you on that. I want to join that conversation.
Yeah, please do. We have a lot of work to do there. It's kind of complicated. Yeah.
So I assume all this, the thing that tweeted is just a screenshot from Civilization. I don't know if anybody's played Civilization before.
That is what these trees are based on. Yes, exactly. In case you couldn't tell.
What I used to love to do in Civilization was a really narrow focus on, I just want to get as quickly as possible to finding out gunpowder. Or
hopefully not this one.
Yeah, maybe not. But similarly, I have some very narrow interests, like my knees are shot and I cartilage regeneration and neurotechnology. I think it just seems like there's so many out there pieces of the tech tree that it feels a bit overwhelming. Is there some sort of a bound where you can be like, if you donate $1 million, this will be ready in a year? Or is it just like, like curing cancer?
Okay, so
or is it,
no, you bring up a great point. So I think for the longevity one, because we actually know what that looks like. For example, we just started together with VitaDAO, that was funded through like a quadratic funding round. They basically got funding from Vitalik and a few others that was then matched to start a longevity prize. And so currently we have a longevity prize out there that kind of is almost like, you could think it as the bounties being like individual pieces to, incentivize a little bit of research. And then the big one, it's called the longevity prize. People can already propose projects to that. That sits at the end of this, basically. And one that was proposed actually by David Furman was basically rejuvenating a human 5 years younger, basically. And that should be a massive one, right? Like, and that could really be slotted almost like as a meta prize at the end here. So you can definitely do the high end goals too, of just like, hey, I want to do the big prize at the end of like, basically fund the end of the pot rather than like the individual steps to that. If you have the money, go for it. Please let me know.
Not anymore. Maybe like a year and a half ago.
Fine. I will slot.
Bitcoin's not doing too well.
Well, if it goes up again, let me know. I will happily slot you here and make a little roll for that. Okay. Any other question? Otherwise, I'll go to the second part of the talk. Also very interactive, maybe even more so than the first one. Okay, cool. So if you're interested in tech trees, if you work in an area in this field, if you want to collaborate on this, if you want to get your own labs listed, if you're an independent research, you want to get your research listed, if you want to fund bounties, we have a whole backlog of them. I think about 50 right now that we'd like to fund. There's a bunch, basically there's a bunch of ways to collaborate. If it's by building, by adding your stuff on the content side or whatnot, just let me know. My Twitter DMs are open. Now let's switch gear to the second part, which is on gaming the future. So one thing that I think also is clear to many of us here talking about DeSci is that this tree is a little bit different than the others, because crypto is not only like a technology sector, but it is actually one that has the potential to fundamentally reshape how we do all the other technology sectors, right? That's why we have DeSci here. How do we use crypto, which could be one technology cluster, to actually reshape the whole of how science works. Before that, we had the same for finance. Now, what I'm asking in the second part of the talk is to think that a bit further of like, if we actually take this concept of like DX seriously, what does it look like to DX the entirety of the way that like human civilization cooperates? And so we kind of like went through this thought process, and we came up and wrote a book called Gaming the Future. And so that book is now available for pre-order, and we basically answer three main questions. The first one is, how can crypto help humans cooperate better? So in that, and we'll get into that in a second, but you have everything from like quadratic funding to whatnot. Second one is, how can crypto, like cryptocurrencies, but also crucially the underlying cryptography, help humans defend themselves against all the technological risks that we will eventually be encountering. We won't only be building the good stuff, we'll also be building the gunpowder stuff. And then the third one is, how can crypto, the underlying framework, help humans and AI cooperate? And so, you know, the main kind of like Peter Thiel's, like, you know, I think it was him who said that, like, you know, AI is authoritarian, crypto is libertarian. So I actually think that there's a lot of like interesting opportunities to, you know, for crypto to shape the way that AI operates on the long run, and to actually make it more accountable, make it more decentralized, make it more democratized, and so forth. And so we basically went out and kind of like wrote that book. Mark Miller, who was one of the co-authors, he was an early cypherpunk. And, you know, he had always had this long-term vision of agoric markets, basically like, you know, what would it look like if individual entities, whether they're computers, humans, what have you, cooperate in an open marketplace in a decentralized way? And he wrote these papers 30 something years ago, the agoric open system papers, and they're still like a total classic. And so basically I sat him down in interviews for a year and just extracted all of that and tried to bring it together with the technologies that are now coming online. And so that book is available, but it also exists for free as a Substack book. And so we didn't only write that with the three of us, or like me, him, and Christine in a corner, but we basically wrote it with the Intelligent Cooperation Group together. So this entire group, the seminar group that you see here, is part of the group that like collaborated on the book as well. And so we had all of these, because for us, like the reason to write a book was we want to actually have progress occur much faster. And so we invited a few of the top thinkers that we know in crypto, and like basically just asked them, like, what is it really that you're currently working on? Why is this important? And like, what is the long-term potential for this? And basically through that, we weave those in the book. Eduardo, do you spot yourself here? And weave that into a book, which is also a Substack book. And the Substack book is interesting because it contains all of these videos whenever they were kind of informing a chapter. But like, I just want to kind of double click on three things here. And again, I want to ask you more for this than I should be speaking. But if you're interested, basically, like the entirety of the book talks about why is cooperation so important? Like, what is the history of cooperation? How did we develop many of the institutions that we currently cooperate with? Like, you know, from like the actual market institutions to like smaller things, like, you know, the way that we interact with each other right now. And what would it look like to improve that with crypto? And so I want to double click on three things. How can we use cryptography to cooperate better? How can we use cryptography to create defenses against the technological risks that we encounter? And how can we use cryptography to cooperate with AIs? And so this one, we basically review a few like really interesting, in our mind, new kind of like pop-ups that are currently being developed in crypto. Like, here's a bit on prediction markets, where we had the first one at one of our member gatherings in like, when was it, 1999? People voted by sending checks to our offices. So we were like an illegal gambling house, one could say. But, you know, we have like, you can have replication markets now. You know, you could already have them in a decentralized way. Like, and here you have like Gnosis and Augur, like, and a few others, really just discussing what long-term prediction markets could do. Obviously, making money immutable. We are like all have tasted our bits of DeFi. What would it look like to create new property rights on the blockchain, and to actually create property rights not only for externalities, but also for things like space resources, for space, right? We need better property rights there. And so we had a few on those, and then how can we use NFTs to actually like engineer new property rights? And then there's a really long one on complex contracts. And so we go from all the way from like split contracts. So basically, what are contracts like where you have a human in the loop? So part of it is automated, part of it can be arbitrated by humans. and then review more like kind of like out there things like dominant assurance contracts, which is a concept developed by Tabarok. We had, I think, Tyler present on VitaDAO here 2 years ago. I think that was when they were incepting, but like basically we review a bunch of like the different technologies and where they could go, have a section on DeSci in there as well. But I want to ask you again now, because there's a bounty at the end of this, which has already been claimed, unfortunately, but we'll just pretend it hasn't. I really want to know from you guys, what is the number one technology that you think is undervalued right now that could really help humans cooperate better? This can be, you know, quadratic funding. It can be something else. Like, is there one thing? It can be from DeSci. It can be a little bit further than DeSci. Really, it's up to you guys. What's the number one crypto thing where you're like, this is really going to change the world of how we cooperate? Something that,
Does it have to be crypto?
no, it doesn't have to be. If there's another one, go for it. How can we cooperate better?
Mental health technology.
Mental health technology. Yes, we are in dire need of this.
Uniform standards,
Uniform standards. Say a bit more.
like basically like JSON or schema.org, but like that worked much better.
Oh God, yeah. And having people use that. Not just having it, but also having people use it. Yeah, Jordan.
I was just gonna say empathy, but how about that one?
Empathy is a great technology.
I don't know if you can. I don't know if you can make an NFT of it, but
The empathy NFT. At
Yeah,
least it
definitely.
rhymes. Yeah,
Zero knowledge proofs.
great one. We have a lot on zero knowledge proofs here. We had Zuko and Howard Hu from Aleo, who maybe a few of you know, but like they basically came and like we had a long-term discussion, like what could the future of zero knowledge enabled cooperation look like for humans. Okay.
In general, just I think situations where you're not replicating raw data and instead just letting the calculations happen and preserving privacy, that's good stuff.
So we have here, like we list a few that we think are really interesting, like homomorphic computing, secure multi-party computation, zero knowledge proofs, and so forth. So I welcome you if you're like, you know, interested in like a few others, maybe that are not inside of your immediate realm, to check those out. But in the interest of time, I do want to get to the AI one. So let's do the one on the risks very quickly. So one thing that we've done through the tech trees is map out what are all the amazing things we can have with technologies, but they're not just amazing, but they're also like pretty terrifying. So, you know, by democratizing technologies more, and that's definitely what DeSci is doing, right? It's democratizing science and technology. We're also democratizing the risks. And so we now have like less and less people that could create a larger and larger risk. And so with biotech, we have that, like, especially if you have things like, you know, really computing in the cloud, where you don't really exactly know what kind of like, yeah, basically like what molecules you're like mixing in with each other, and you can have dark markets for that and so forth. You can develop like, you know, weapons of mass destruction maybe easily on something like OpenBazaar, but for science, right? Like that's kind of like what we're looking at with DeSci also on the risk end. And we don't really have a way to stop it because it could all be automated, immutable, and it could be private. So that's really scary. And then on the other hand, usually when we talk about technology risk, the solution is like, oh, we need government regulation. We need a strong, you know, state actor that can like monitor everyone and that can do a strong enforcement if it must to against bad actors. And so in this chapter, we also talk about the risks that come from that, because that's also really risky, right? If we have one actor that can really pervasively surveil and enforce, maybe through robots, we're also not in a utopia. And so we talk about what would it look like to use crypto to do that? How can we decentralize defense? And so there are a few really awesome ways on how you can already do private surveillance. So without really revealing much of the relevant attributes, you can surveil in a pretty kind of like interesting, but nevertheless decentralized and privacy preserving way. And so we talk about a few concepts here. And we also talk about like a few other technologies. For example, proof of location is amazing because with proof of location, you can prove that something is in a like that something was produced in a different jurisdiction. And so you can actually actively incentivize people to be decentralized while they're building technologies. And so we go through a few of them. But if I wanted to ask you guys, is there one crypto technology where you're like, this is great, this is going to be massively important for defending civilizations against some of the technological risks that we are producing? It's a more difficult one than the first question for sure. But if you think about cryptography as a defense technology, right? What would it look like to use that to defend civilization? Any bits that you have where you're like, there's this really one. I mean, zero knowledge technologies are a pretty good one for privacy preserving monitoring, but like there may be others.
Quantum proof encryption.
Nice one. Yeah, we need to get around to do that anyways. Yeah, that's a good one.
I'm a one-trick pony, but the one I gave earlier was if you are a reporter in a war zone that is afraid for your life, if you are going and reporting on a government that may attack you for your reporting, that maybe you could go and anonymously report things using cryptography.
Great. We actually have that in the other chapter, and that's called a anonymous dominant assurance contract, by which basically you can collect whistleblowing signatures anonymously behind a veil and only unveil them if enough signatories have been collected that warrant a specific claim, so they can all come out together. Okay, cool. So just to let you know, like, please think about this more. We don't only need need to be working on the science and technology, but we also really need to be working on the defense technologies, because if we don't build them, we will have centralized defense technologies, and they come with their own risks. Like, if we don't figure out how we can make DeSci a bit more bulletproof against the risks, then eventually we have governments coming in and basically like shut things down. And then the final one, the big one, where I really want people in crypto to think about much more, is AI. Like, I already said this, there's this often, I think, and this is definitely like not really an accurate description, but like this notion like flying around in someone's head that AI is a little bit more of a centralized technologies, right? And that comes with a bunch of network effects and so forth. And we talk about basically different ways in how we can potentially decentralize AI, and why decentralization of AI is important. Because if you have one big actor that you have to align, like if you have one big super intelligence that you have to align with human values, you really have to get the values right. And then you have to be able to incorporate them into a super intelligence that is silicon based, that doesn't share any of your substrate, human context, what have you. And so we come up with a little bit more of a decentralized framework. And so a big one here for us is private machine learning. If we can have more private machine learning, we can maybe create more kind of competitively advantageous AIs to solve specific problems. And there's a bunch of really like interesting pieces already at least written on this. And then you can have blockchains, to really hold systems more accountable. And you can have a few other technologies too, like incomplete contracts and so forth. And you can play around with this a little bit more. But like, I want to know from you guys again, are you aware of any kind of technologies that are right now being developed in the crypto space where, there is a potential for potentially keeping AI safe, secure, accountable? Are you aware of any projects that rekindle already the space between AI and crypto that you think are exciting? It's so early in that space, though. I do think in the next 5 years, in 5 years, we'll be standing here and everyone will just be talking about like crypto and AI. I think at least, because there's so much potential. Like, everyone is playing around with their own AI, with their own AI algorithms right now. And, if we could have that integrate with many of the cryptography technologies that many of you are building on, I think we can get to a few really wonderful applications. Private machine learning is tremendous for healthcare, right? That's awesome for finance. Like, you really, if you want to use machine learning on financial data, you need to have it encrypted. Anyway, so that's really just to kind of bring you a little bit food for thought of, if you think a bit beyond DeSci and take that concept seriously, of kind of using this decentralized concept to collaborate better across humans, to defend humans, and to collaborate with AIs, what would that look like? Because ultimately, I think it's you guys that are building these technologies. And if we don't come up with this, like, we're going to have, I think, futures that are like less wonderful and that are less decentralized, that are less collaborative in this way. And so I really just want to, appeal to you to kind of think further. I think DeSci is already outrageously ambitious and I love it. But I think beyond that, on the long run, we can really take that and take that concept and apply to every single field that we're working in, right? Including ultimately how we collaborate with AIs. And so if you're interested in exploring any of this further, then you are welcome to, send me a Twitter DM. We have a bunch of events. For example, Vision Weekend is the one that's coming up. It's in a castle in France. It's our annual member gathering where we basically bring the best people from all of our different technology tracks together in a castle in France and at the Internet Archive here in San Francisco. And we just do a review across different technologies, just like what the hell happened this year? How can we shape these technologies towards like positive futures? And so we have like multiple tracks in parallel on brain-computer interfaces, crypto, AI, energy space, new funding resources. We have a big DeSci track in that as well. And there's still a few tickets, but the one in France is already coming up in 2 weeks. And so if you want to join us, please, 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 there's still a few tickets left. There's also an application form for subsidized tickets. Otherwise, I would say if you're interested in just getting your kind of fingers wet or like hands wet in these technology areas, feel free to apply to one. So we have these like monthly seminars in each of these areas, and then application form basically just lets you in. You get a screening, like an interview, and then you're in that group. Like it's a bit like a seminar group, really. And we have these workshops that I, just showed you the crypto workshop of. So if you're interested in collaborating more, then please go for it. We also have the fellowship that I mentioned. But yeah, if you're interested, please talk to me. You can tweet at me. I have the physical book here in case you're interested in that. And finally, I should say we're also hiring. So we're always looking for people that are self-driven, highly motivated, and can kind of carve out their own field of area of work. And so frankly, whatever you're working on, if it's Foresight aligned, please reach out to me. We have a job description, an open position here, but also you can just tweet at me. So we're always looking for more collaborators and as we're growing relatively fast. Okay, thanks everyone.
Wow, that was amazing. Thanks so much, Allison.